My name is Ola and I come from England. I'm an art psychotherapist. I want to talk a bit about the work that I do. I come from a background of community work. I was a play worker, I was a youth worker, and then after some time I decided to retrain as an art therapist. Part of the reason I retrained as an art therapist was because I have worked with lots of different communities, lots of different groups, and within that work experience I was often very aware that people were having difficulties, they were distressed, and it's something that I've always ended up talking about with people, but I felt like I wanted to do it in a more formal way. So the things that are important to me in my work and in my practice are just being a human being, being a person. And I think if you can be a person when you're working with somebody, for me that's about being able to relate to them in terms of where they are, what they want to talk about and what's going on for them. So an example of this would be if somebody comes to me for art therapy. I think it's very useful if we try and find out together what the problem is. People might come with the problem like they don't sleep very well, or they're having lots of headaches, or they feel very stressed. So I'll find a way to work with people to try and find a new language. So that might be working with a child, it might be not using language at all. So I've worked with children who will come and make art but don't want to talk about it. And that's okay, because I think sometimes just making art is very therapeutic, and maybe one day they might feel confident enough to be able to talk about their images or their pictures, but it's not absolutely necessary. I work with adults, and quite often people will ask me questions, well, when you work with adults, is it different to working with children? And I would always say, I might use different language or I might use a different way of speaking with them, but I think it's the same work. My understanding of adult distress, particularly if it's happened when they're children, is they're still carrying that distressed child around inside them. So the language is very important. So I might ask how old do they feel when they feel that upset? Where might they feel that upset in their body? If it's a very small child, I say, is it a big upset? Is it a small upset? And try to use very simple language like hurt, sad. People might say they feel very heavy, and really try to think about the language that they're using and for me to repeat that back to them. So what's very important to me is that we can very easily misunderstand words. We have lots of words around mental health that sometimes mean some things to somebody but not to everybody. So if people say that they're anxious, I'll say, can you describe that to me? Are you shaking? Are you nervous? Are you sweating? When does it happen? Do you remember when it first happened? So what's very important to me in the way that I work is that it's a part of the research. So, and that research has got to be something that, it's not research that I do, and it's not research that I would ask somebody else to go and do on their own, but is there a way that we can work together to begin to develop a common language and a common understanding? And we might get it wrong lots of times, but even getting it wrong is very important. So for instance, if I say to somebody, I might look at their drawing and say, oh, that's interesting, it looks like a hedgehog. And I love it when people say, no, it's not a hedgehog, it's a hairbrush. I think, oh, okay. When they say to me it's a hairbrush and they're very angry, there's something about that hairbrush. So I might find a way to ask some more questions about the hairbrush. Okay, do you like your hair being brushed? There seems to be something about the hairbrush. I'm not quite sure, but this feels that there's something about that. Because I'm a black woman and I know about black children and hair, this may be an issue that comes up about having their hair brushed when they're very small. So for my experience, because I try to always use my personal experience, that when I was a child I had lots of hair, I still have lots of hair. My mum is a white European woman and she never knew how to look after our hair. So she would get very frustrated, she'd get very cross, and she'd drag the brush through, and if we complained she'd hit us on the head with the brush. So I know if I'm talking to a black child, it's probably going to be something about that experience. So I think what I always try to do is to think about, is this something that I understand from my experience that might be like your experience, or if it's something that I don't know about, can you tell me about that so I understand you better? So I think I always try to work in a way that's actually about empowering people. I think one of the big issues that I have about sort of therapy, therapist, the therapy world and the therapeutic language is it's always, what's ignored is the power issues. So I know if I sit here as an adult with a child, I'm in a more powerful position. If I'm sat there with an adult who's distressed, they think that I'm okay and I'm not distressed. If I'm sat there with somebody who struggles with the same language that we speak, they might think I'm more articulate or more educated. So I feel that my responsibility and my duty is to address the power dynamics. So if I can do anything that reduces the inequality, I will do that. So an example of that was I was working with a woman recently who was very traumatised and very scared, and she was very triggered. She was having panic attacks in front of me and she felt very embarrassed. And after working with her for 2 or 3 months, I was able to say to her, you know, I was where you were once. I used to have panic attacks. I was scared of going out the house. I was assaulted at work. So it's okay. And me sitting here now telling you also lets you know that you can go through this experience and you can also come through it. And so that to me is very important. If I'm working with a child, I can talk about when I was a child, what sort of things I didn't like or the things that scared me. I quite often talk about my daughter. She is a child who has experienced hearing voices. So to me that experience is very important because I can talk about it from a child's perspective, I can speak about it from a parent's perspective, and I can also speak about it from a parent's perspective that, and how upset I was when I found that out. So in that situation, I can talk about, you know, I became ill, I had to be separated from my daughter, and there's an assumption that if you're a therapist, you've got it all right, you know what you're doing. And my daughter suffered because I had to ask her to go and live with her father for some time. So I feel that my personal experiences, my personal struggles, my resilience, my triumphs, my education are all something that can be part of that therapy process. And always to think about, is this therapeutic? So it's not therapeutic if I'm just telling people my story because I'm having a bad day, but would it help that person think about their experience? So yeah, I think for me the issues around your personal life, your political life, because I'm a very political person, I'm a black woman, I have grown up with oppression, I have grown up in a family that's not particularly able to talk about things. All those things to me are ways in which we can be in touch with somebody, connect with somebody. So for me, the very important things about being connected, so that person that you're working with doesn't feel isolated in their own experience, and also to think about ways after I've finished that work with that person, how do they connect with themselves and with other people? So when I talk about myself as an art therapist and a community worker, I know how important community is. So if I've worked with somebody who needs some support as a parent, I want to get in touch with parent support groups, or if there's somebody who's in the house who can't leave the house, we'll think about how can they access Facebook. You know, there's lots of different ways where people can connect, and connection is so important. And we know from any experience of distress or mental health, people feel alone. So I think anything that connects people either to themselves, to their family, to their community, or to a family that is not maybe blood family, but somewhere that they can actually find some way to be in connection with somebody else is very important.